Welcome to this press briefing on the forthcoming visit of His Excellency General Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi. To brief you on this very, very important visit, I have with me Secretary East, Sri Anil Vadava, who will give you a broad overview of the program of the incoming dignitary, as also what are our expectations from this visit. With that, I give the floor to Secretary East.
Well, dear friends, today we are here for the briefing on the state visit of His Excellency Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi. He comes here at the invitation of our Prime Minister, Sri Narendra Modi, and he is also the Deputy Supreme Commander of UAE Armed Forces. He will be here from 10th to the 12th of February 2016. This is the first state visit to India by the Crown Prince. Of course, he has visited India earlier in 1999 and 2003 in other capacities. But I wanted to also highlight that it is the unique visit by a Crown Prince from Abu Dhabi. And he is accompanied by a high-level delegation that comprises cabinet ministers, senior officials, and business leaders. The delegation-level talks would be held between the Prime Minister and Crown Prince. Also, Rashtrapati Ji would receive the Crown Prince and host a private lunch for him. The Crown Prince and his delegation would also visit Mumbai and meet with Indian business leaders in the financial sector at the Mumbai Stock Exchange. This visit marks the excellent rapport which has been struck between the leadership of our countries, because it comes only a few months after the visit of our Prime Minister to UAE, which happened in August 2015. And that, of course, was a visit by a Prime Minister from India after a gap of 34 years. After the visit of the Emir of Qatar to India in March 2015, again, this would be the next highest level visit from the Gulf region, which is extremely important from India, as it is home to 7 million Indians, source of nearly 60% of our energy needs, is one of our largest export destinations, and a major source of remittances. And this region also has a very strong bearing on India's security and stability in our neighborhood. Traditionally, our predominant interests in UAE have been to expand our trade and economic partnership, also to secure inward and long-term energy supplies, and of course the continued welfare of our large community which resides there. India and UAE are among each other's largest trading partners. UAE is the sixth largest source of our imports of crude oil. It hosts 2.6 million strong Indian expatriate community, and we have a robust bilateral investment relationship as well. It would be fair to say that India remains a priority country for UAE as well, being one of its largest trading partners, major recipient of UAE crude oil exports, a potential destination of their investments, and of course the great support that the Indian community is providing in UAE in the development of the country. The visit takes place after we have decided to elevate our relationship to a comprehensive strategic partnership during our Prime Minister's visit to UAE in August 2015. And this would provide an opportunity to have detailed discussions to consolidate the domains of the existing partnership and also to constructively build on the vision of the comprehensive strategic partnership in some new areas, new agreed areas, which are, if I may name a few, production of defense equipment in India, strategic partnership in security, in counter-terrorism, cooperation in nuclear and the space sector, in energy sector, including renewable energy. We have signed several agreements in MOU for cooperation in different areas of mutual interest between India and UAE, but a number of new agreements in MOUs are proposed to be signed during the visit of the Crown Prince to expand the areas of our cooperation. This list is still being updated, So I won't be able to give you the exact number right now, but as we speak, some negotiations are still going on. Our three presidents and two prime ministers had visited UAE in the past. From the UAE side, former president of UAE has visited India on 2 occasions. And of course, we had the vice president and the prime minister of UAE and ruler of Dubai who visited India during 2007 and 2010. Recently, at the ministerial level, we've had a number of exchanges as well. From our side, the External Affairs Minister was in UAE in November 2014, followed by the visits of Minister of State for Finance in April 2015, the Minister of State for Commerce and Industry in October 2015, and the Minister of Finance in November 2015, whereas from the UAE side, the Minister of Foreign Affairs had visited us in September 2015, the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs in December 2015 and January 2016, and the Managing Director of the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority also visited India earlier during this month. As I said, UAE is India's third largest trading partner of the United States and China. The bilateral trade is nearly $60 billion US dollars, and it is our second largest export destination. This was worth $33 billion US dollars in 2014-15. It was decided during the visit of our Prime Minister to UAE in August 2015 to raise the bilateral trade by 60% in the next 5 years. And the two sides are drawing action plans for achieving these targets. UAE is also among the top 10 investors in India since 2000, with a cumulative foreign direct investment of 3.3 billion US dollars. It is also estimated that UAE has invested about US dollars 5 billion in portfolio investments into India. The UAE controls the second largest sovereign wealth fund in the world, which is around 800 billion US dollars under Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, ADIA as it's called, and this is an important source of investment for the Indian infrastructure sector. A high-level task force on investments between India and UAE was set up in 2012 under the Minister of State for Commerce and Industry, and that has met 4 times, which is February 2013, March 2014, October 2015, and February 2016. We've also signed a bilateral investment protection agreement, promotion and protection agreement in December 2013. And, of course, during the visit of our Prime Minister in August 2015, it was also decided to encourage investment institutions in the United Arab Emirates to raise investments in the infrastructure sector in India with the aim of reaching a target of 75 billion US dollars. So the UAE has consequently been invited to participate in the National Infrastructure Investment Fund in India. During November 2011, India and UAE also signed an agreement on security cooperation. A joint security committee was then set up under the agreement, and this meets regularly. We have agreed to enhance cooperation in counter-terrorism operations, intelligence sharing, and capacity building. We also have an agreement on defense cooperation and established a joint committee on security under this MOU. This was signed in 2003. And this cooperation extends to training for UAE armed forces in India, visits of experts and officers, port calls by naval ships, etc. We have agreed for collaboration in the production of defense equipment in India. As I said, UAE is important for our energy security. Nearly 9.38% of India's requirement of crude oil is imported from UAE. This figure was 15.99 million metric tons in 2014-15. UAE is the 6th largest source of crude oil for India. Through the joint statement that was issued during the Prime Minister's visit to the UAE, the two countries had agreed to make bilateral investments in the petroleum sector and also to take up joint projects in third countries. After Saudi Arabia, UAE hosts the largest number of Indians in the Gulf. That's approximately nationals. The annual remittances of over 15 billion US dollars, and this is a 2013 figure, were made by Indian community in UAE. There are close to 900 direct flights operating every week between various destinations in India and the UAE. And there are more than 50 Indian schools, 4 universities, 5 registered Indian associations in Abu Dhabi, and 1 each in the other 6 emirates in the UAE. So, well-developed relationship. Now, if I may, I might run you through briefly the program. And the program starts when the Crown Prince arrives in New Delhi this evening, and there will be a call on him by our Minister for External Affairs, and thereafter on February 11th, there would be a guard of honor in his honor in Rashtrapati Bhavan. He will visit Rajghat thereafter, and he would also plant saplings over there. There would be a private meeting with the Prime Minister, and then a call on the President, followed by a lunch, which is hosted by the President. There would be a call on the Vice President in the evening, and then exchange of the Prime Minister would receive him after that, followed by the exchange of agreements in Hyderabad House, some press statements, etc., and a working dinner which will be hosted by our Prime Minister in his honor. On the 12th of February, he goes to Mumbai and has a program in the Bombay Stock Exchange, meeting with select financial institutions and persons, and thereafter there would be a reception hosted by the UAE side in Mumbai itself before he leaves in the evening. So this is a very packed program for him, and the delegation which accompanies him is already engaged in negotiations. The business leaders would be arriving, some in Delhi and some in Mumbai as well, and they would be having a separate business event at noon time in Mumbai on the 12th. Thank you. And I take
Floor
some
is now
questions.
open for questions. Manish?
सर अंडर द कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव स्ट्रेटेजिक पार्टनरशिप काउंटर टेररिज्म भी उसका एक हिस्सा है. जब प्राइम मिनिस्टर दुबई गए थे तो ये बात आई थी कि हम लोगों ने दाऊद की प्रॉपर्टी को लेकर भी कुछ लिस्ट उनको हैंडओवर किया था. क्या इस संबंध में कुछ बात आगे बढ़ी है या उसको लेकर आप चर्चा करेंगे?
मैं कोई स्पेसिफिक इंडिविजुअल या केस के बारे में आपको बताने में हिचकिचाहट होती है मुझे, क्योंकि ये these are ongoing exchanges, and what stage they are at the moment, I myself am not in a position first to answer, and secondly, I think we should not go into specifics here. Suffice it to say that the security cooperation between our two countries has been exemplary. There is complete meeting of minds on this issue, and in terms of counter-terrorism steps, both sides, the officials of both sides meet regularly.
Maha Siddiqui?
Sir, the slipping oil prices have resulted in a stress in economies in the Gulf region, which is hitting the expats because many of the Gulf nations are taking austerity measures, including the UAE, by taxing their incomes now. Another country like Oman putting a ban on visas for 2 years if people leave their jobs and come back. Is that issue likely to be taken up, at least with UAE taxing of incomes? Because that was a great draw for people to go from India to work in the Gulf.
I think each country has to manage its economy the way it sees fit. If a country is facing an economic crisis, and of course the many steps that they take to rectify that is something which is an internal matter. I don't think it is fit for us to point out as to what they should be doing. But of course, as far as the welfare of the Indian community is concerned, that is always discussed in general terms. If there's something which actually affects them, I'm sure it will be mentioned by the UAE side to us. If it does happen, then of course we would be pointing out the difficulties that it would cause socially and economically. So I would leave it at that.
Ranjit.
You said that UAE is interested in investing in defense sector. In which particular area, any specific area they are interested in?
That's an ongoing, negotiations at the moment, and we haven't finalized the sectors as yet.
Elizabeth.
Sir, you mentioned nuclear civil cooperation in civil nuclear energy. Could you elaborate on that a little bit, and aerospace as well?
Yes, as you know, first I'll start with aerospace because UAE is embarking on a Mars mission in 2020. India has capabilities and expertise in launch and also in production capabilities, and we can assist in that process. So we would like to collaborate in this effort as far as UAE is concerned. And our ISRO is very much willing to step forward in that direction. In case there is a requirement of collaboration in the nuclear field, once again our concerned agencies are in touch and they would be able to collaborate with each other. We haven't finalized an MOU in this regard, so the talks are still ongoing.
Venkat.
Mr. Adva, when the PM went to the UAE, there was this talk of UAE wanting to or invest something like $75 billion in our projects and so on. How much of it is likely to materialize during the Crown Prince's visit to India? And you said that there is something about defense production. Are you hinting at the possibility of India manufacturing defense equipment with other countries in our country, which can be exported to the UAE? Is that one of the things you are talking about? Thanks.
Yes, I think taking your second question first, what you said is exactly right. I mean, that should be the pattern of investments by them. Joint production in order to meet the requirements of the investing state as well as India and even third countries if that is possible. In terms of the investments, as I mentioned earlier in my briefing, the figure mentioned in our joint statements was investments up to $75 billion US dollars. That needs to be realized over time. The first such step in this direction would be taken when we discuss about UAE investments in our National Investment Fund, which has just been set up, as you know, and also in the field of electronics, which we've been discussing in the past. Of course, there are other areas that the UAE investors have been talking about. The 100-strong business delegation, which is there in Mumbai, will be discussing these issues further over the next few days. Some of them will stay back for Make in India as well. And I think there would be a substantial amount that would be negotiated over the next few months.
Arunim.
So just a little clarification regarding that investment figure of $75 billion. Is it both ways? Or it is one
No,
way
it
from
is for the
UAE to
States
UAE
to
yeah.
invest
Okay.
into
Is
India.
it the single biggest investment from a Gulf country or overall from any country?
Well, as I said, this is an aspirational figure. If you read it carefully, the joint statement says that the UAE will invest up to $75 billion. So one can't, sort of classify this as the largest investment or not. That depends on how much and what happens over time in this year, next year, or the coming years. So it's an ongoing process. The FDI process is an ongoing process. I think we should not, put it in a category.
Smita.
Just two questions. One, in terms of the UAE Crown Prince, prior to his visit in an interview, he said that the ISIS threat is much closer for India. What is the kind of perception that India shares or the expectations that countries like Saudi and UAE have vis-a-vis India on the ISIS front? And Sushma Swaraj, the minister, recently said that she had direct communication in Bahrain, a direct message that said that the 39 Indians in Iraq are still alive. Could you elaborate a little bit? What is this direct message?
Okay. Let me take the first question first. And in terms of ISIS, I think we're talking about collaboration and information exchange. The steps that India has taken to make sure that our youth don't get radicalized, also de-radicalization of those who come back, monitoring of the cyberspace, etc., and what steps are being taken in both countries. Specifically, I can just name a few examples. So there is more. On your other question, the minister she was meeting on 15 other ministers of the Arab League in Bahrain, and before that she had just completed a visit to Palestine and to Israel, where she was told by her counterparts from a few countries that according to their inputs that the 39 Indians who were kidnapped in Mosul were still alive. And this is what she has conveyed during the meeting with the families of the 39 Indians who've been missing since June 2014. And so there is nothing more to that, and this is something that was conveyed, and she's faithfully conveyed it to them.
Any other questions? Kalol.
So the UAE, Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, they have pledged to send troops to Syria if asked by the Western powers. Now that UAE and India are collaborating on the defense front, what exactly is India's position as far as Syria is concerned and as far as defense cooperation with UAE is concerned? Do you think that India might actually at some point end up training UAE troops that might get sent over to Syria?
We have not been asked and not been approached on those two issues, and if we are approached, then we will formulate a response at that point in time.
Okay, last question. Mukesh.
On David Coleman Headley's submission.
No, David Coleman Headley has nothing to do with the UAE Crown Prince visit, so I think we close it at that. Thank you.
Thank you.